Hey, Facebook. Trying Thursday today, as I warned you last week. I promise you can still watch on Friday if that's better for you. But I'm trying to get this out in many forms by the end of the week, and I think it'll help if I can do this on Thursday. So, again, as usual, going to try not to talk fast because I have a lot of stuff to cover today. There's stuff happening all the time, and I think it's important that you have heads up on it. So first of all, I wanted to just maybe, at the risk of repeating myself, talk a little bit about the process and what's happening now. Because what's happening now in a lot of committees as they approach the what's called the joint filing deadline. So committees only have a certain number of time to vote bills out of committee that will then get a vote on the floor of the House and the Senate. So we're hitting those deadlines soon. For some committees, it's the end of March. For some, it's not till May. But so we're having a lot of actual votes in committees to move bills from the committee to the floor of the House of the Senate. So I just wanted to review the process here. So a bill, as I talked about before, our deadline for submitting bills as individual legislatures was back in January. Then those bills get consolidated, redrafted, various things happen to them, but they get assigned to individual committees. Each committee has a screening function, which is the leadership of the committee in various formats, depending on the committee, meets to decide which bills they can realistically move forward this year. And sometimes, for many reasons, bills don't make it past that phase. Maybe they're duplicative of other bills or duplicative of legislation already in place. There's also an effort on all of the committees I sit on to have a balance, which is to say that to present bills for public hearing and then the next stage in the process that are advocated for both by Democrats and by Republicans. Some are bipartisan, but some are just from one part or the other. And I think everybody agrees that it's in the entire body's interest to present bills from a variety of perspectives. And so, at least in all the committees I sit on, there's an effort to do that. That said, they can't hear everything, so some things just don't make it past that initial screening process. The ones that do get a public hearing, and that's where some of you have come to testify on a variety of bills. And you can sign up to testify, you can submit written testimony, and the hearings sometimes go quite late into the night. I've had several that have gone past midnight, and I at least signed up for this, but I know many people who sign up to testify on behalf of a certain bill think that the committee hearing that's scheduled at 10 o'clock and they're still here at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night trying to testify, and that's hard on the public and it's hard to manage, but we want to make sure we hear from as many people as possible. So that's the next phase. A bill has to have a public hearing if it's going to make it to the next step. So then after that, again, there's another screening process after the public hearing and trade-offs between the leadership from both parties of the committee, and some of those bills get pulled for various reasons, and others move to the vote phase, which is what is happening now, where committee members get to vote on whether we want to advance a bill to the floor of the House and the Senate. And a quick reminder that all of our committees are joint committees, which is to say we have both senators and representatives on every committee. So once it passes out of the committee, it will go to the next step is to go to the leadership of the Senate and the leadership of the House. There is yet another screening function at that level in which leadership on both sides talk about which bills are going to move forward. So there's yet another opportunity for a bill not to make it. And there are a couple things to note about that. Is one, that we just don't have the capacity to hear everything, but also bills can get dropped for a variety of reasons. And if you're advocating for a particular bill, which I am this year, in particular on municipal gain, which I'll highlight in a minute, you got to stay on it every phase of the way. And there are lots of hurdles between a proposal and actual legislation, and sometimes it takes several years before a proposal makes it that far. And that's probably on balance a good thing because, I think it's generally, if something makes it through all those phases, it's probably a better bill and more thoroughly thought out, and you get more chance to hear different opinions on it and poke at it from various sides. And I think the process, although messy at times, is a better one for all those steps along the way. Anything else about the process that I wanted to? So the other thing that I want to talk about is about that advocacy process. What you start to realize in this is that there will always be legislators, and I will probably be one myself, where there are always going to be legislators who don't have the time or the interest to dig into the details of every single bill. So they're relying on colleagues that they've identified as experts in a subject matter, reliable people who are, are good for their word. If they tell you that this proposal means this particular thing, you can rely on them that it actually does mean that, and that, and so part of being a freshman is establishing those relationships. And particularly for me, I see both sides of that. One, I am in particular because two of the committees that I sit on have a wide subject matter jurisdiction, which say appropriations and judiciary cover a whole host of issues that aren't just focused on one narrow subject matter. So in appropriations, for example, right now we're having work groups in various subcommittees, and just today we had a subcommittee meeting, working group session on conservation and development, and we heard from the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, or DEEP. And because I sit on the Environment Committee, I have some more familiarity with that. I understand the workings of that agency better. It is complex, and I wouldn't pretend to say I understand more, and we had lots of questions, and hopefully we'll get more information from them. But that's one, at least, you learn well. I also sit on the subcommittee for health, so I sit on the appropriations subcommittee for health, but I don't sit on the public health committee. So I have to get expertise from people who are. And in today's hearing, for example, the other agency we heard from was the Department of Labor, and particularly about how to go about implementing a paid family medical leave, which is incredibly complex, and we don't have a lot of good models to follow. So that bill, generally speaking, and the workings of it is in front of the Labor Committee. Again, I don't sit on the Labor Committee, so I identify legislators that I can trust, who have expertise that I can go to and find out from them, how to approach this. So I'm identifying people that I can rely on, and I'm also aware that I'm building a reputation as someone who, if somebody comes to me and says, how does this work? And I describe it, I am someone you can rely on. And that's an important thing, but it takes time when there are 151 of us here. So I want to highlight some of the votes that I took this week. In the Environment Committee on Monday, we had a number of important bills, two of which had to do with bears, which have been a big topic. So one of them was a bill to require, and I covered some of this in a video I did earlier this week, so I'm going to try to be fast about this one. But one was on requiring DEEP to come up with a program for non-lethal management of bears, which is to say a variety of methods for discouraging bears and teaching them not to come into our towns, and to reduce their contact with humans, and to keep them in the woods where they are more healthy and better off. So that passed overwhelmingly. Then there is also a bill which began as a bill to create a hunting season for bears in Litchfield County. It is no longer that bill. That language has been entirely removed from the bill, and the bill that passed out of the committee was a very slight amendment to a statute which already gives. So there's a statute in place today which gives farmers the ability to deal with a nuisance animal that is causing substantial damage to their crops. The only thing we passed out of committee, an amendment to that, which adds beyond crop damage, it adds damage to livestock, bees, and poultry. That's the only change. Nothing else changes about to repeat myself again, sorry, but in order to do that, a farmer has to get a permit from DEEP, and they have to demonstrate that the damage has been substantial, and that this is the lethal method is necessary. Again, that didn't change. That was in the statute before. It's still in the statute today. It is my belief, and this is some of the research that I'm going to do going forward, that necessary component is really important, because when we have, and I hope we do have, this non-lethal bear management plan in place at the close of this session, that will be part of DEEP's decision process about what is necessary. In other words, you will have to demonstrate that you have tried non-lethal methods before you resort to to lethal ones. So I'm going to look into that more seriously before I can decide whether I'll support the bill in its final form. But that's what the Bear bill was. We also had a favorable vote on a bottle redemption bill, which increases the bottle deposit and handling fees. That had not been updated for decades, and as a result, the rates of recycling in Connecticut have dropped dramatically, and redemption centers were going out of business, so the hope is that this will help improve our performance on that. We also passed out of committee a ban on styrofoam trays and limited the use of plastic straws. So environment was a long day that day. We started off with committee votes on those bills, and then we moved into a public hearing in which we considered many bills, which I won't all describe here or you'd be here all day. But I do want to highlight one because I think it's really quite important on a number of levels, and that is to say this is a bill that apparently has been proposed in various forms for the last several years, and it's a carbon tax. And I have a couple of observations about that. First of all, I want to acknowledge that this is a well-intentioned bill. It is aimed at dealing with climate change, which is real and destructive and is already costing, it is already imposing economic, environmental, and health costs on people across the globe. And by the most comprehensive report from the federal government, we have about 12 years to deal with it before these changes become irreversible. So this is a serious issue, and it's already creating costs, and those costs are going to continue to be borne mostly by people who are least able to pay them. So it is a serious issue that I look forward to addressing in many ways. But this bill is troubling because we can't just deal in theoretical concerns. This bill would impose a tax, for example, on home heating oil. And for people struggling to decide what they're going to pay for this month, seniors on fixed incomes, struggling young families, increasing the cost of home heating oil can also be a significant cost. I mean, it's a significant cost to increase for them, but it can have significant implications for health. It could be even life-threatening in some circumstances. So, I have serious reservations about supporting any bill that would create those very obvious and immediate costs on vulnerable communities, and without significant supports in place for them, I find this bill pretty troubling, although, again, well-intentioned and an important matter to keep talking about. So in Judiciary, we also had a number of votes. Judiciary, we covered some immigration-related bills and several gun safety-related bills, which I want to highlight for you today. I was very proud to support these gun safety bills that were favorably voted out of committee with bipartisan support. And I want to note that the committee process, we got delayed. It was another long meeting, but that's largely because there were really serious efforts on the part of our committee leadership from both parties to come up with some language that could have bipartisan support. And by and large, we have done that. They were not unanimous by any stretch of the imagination, but these bills had support from serious conservative Republicans, and that's a good thing. One of those bills was HB 7218, which is known as Ethan's Law, in honor of a 15-year-old young man who lost his life as a result of a firearm that was stored in a cardboard box right next to the ammunition. And Connecticut already has laws in place that require a loaded gun in the home of someone where either a minor or another vulnerable person lives, for that loaded weapon to be stored safely. The Ethan's Law that passed out of committee earlier this week requires also unloaded firearms to be stored safely in the home where a minor, which is to say somebody under the age of 18 or other vulnerable person, lives. So that we heard some very affecting testimony about that, including a lot of powerful advocacy from the Song family. So very proud to sign on to that one. We also passed HB 7223, which requires safe storage of pistols or revolvers in unattended vehicles. That required a little bit more definition about how to do that in a vehicle, which is different than doing it in a home. But we did get a favorable report, and I'm glad about that. And we also passed HB 7219, which is the ban on ghost guns. This is one of the ones that the language changed numerous times before it got to committee, and I am told I expect that it will change again before it reaches the floor of the House. That's because there are a lot of things in here that are hard to define, and I think there is very strong bipartisan support for the concept, but you got to make sure you get the wording right, and so that's a bit of a moving target. But we did pass the concept forward, and I'm very proud about that. We also passed out of committee SB 60, which is a little bit controversial. That is an act concerning presentation of a carry permit, and what it says is that if a law enforcement officer sees a firearm on somebody and that is visible, so it's an open carry in that sense, they can ask for the permit. The legislature considered this bill last year, but it didn't move through for a variety of reasons, but the most powerful of which is that there's a lot of fear that this kind of law could lead to racially biased enforcement. When it's discretionary to ask that kind of question, we know from our own history that often that means that people in certain communities, particularly communities of color, get asked that question more than other people. And so I and many of the legislators on the committee in both the Republican and the Democratic caucuses were very concerned about that. I took my cue from several members of that committee who were members of the Black and Puerto Rican caucus, who were in favor of advancing the bill out of committee in the hopes that it might be their concerns might be alleviated through further drafting. So I joined them and I supported it out of committee, but we'll have to see whether how that goes from here. So I also wanted to highlight, Wednesday, in addition to being a long hearing in Judiciary, it was Connecticut Business Day, so the Northwest Chamber was in full force out in the Capitol. And it was Ag Day, so the FFA from Region 1 was here, who I am always happy to see, and I had a great chance to hang out with them and when their fabulous teacher, Mr. Burdick. I also got an opportunity, we had a press conference with Representative Michelle Cook about our advocacy for agricultural education. And as I always do at those opportunities, I really believe strongly that the kind of education that the FFA kids are getting is not just evidence of a long and strong tradition of supporting agriculture, but it's actually, those kids are learning cutting edge skills. They're learning the kinds of skills that all these, like a lot of fancy schools all around the country are just suddenly discovering, that, learning to work on a team, learning to identify expertise, learning to have a plan and following through on your plan from beginning to end, and to have presentation skills. I'm so impressed by them every time I see them, and I really think it's a model that, a lot of education outside of agriculture ought to look to. So that's always fun to see them. I also had that day, March is Women's History Month, so trying I learned a little bit of women's history that I actually hadn't focused on before, and that's that there is a statue that we walk past often, every time we go to the chamber, of a woman named Prudence Crandall, and I'd heard her name, but I actually didn't know about her before. She was a teacher back in the early to mid 1800s, and she ran a school, and she taught African-American girls as well. She brought a girl in, a 17-year-old African-American girl, into her school, and at that time, of course, that, meant that she lost a lot of her other students, so she chose to focus on the education of African-American girls, and she stuck with it and was tenacious, and finally was honored for that lifelong effort towards the end of her life. So she fought for a lot of civil rights issues for all kinds of people, and she's a proud part of our Connecticut history, women's history. So we had a little event for her. Couple of highlights coming up. First of all, tomorrow in Judiciary, we have a public hearing in which we're going to be talking about possibly legalizing cannabis. That is another bill that has been much chewed on and the language has changed much. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that tomorrow. And tonight I will be in Norfolk at an event for affordable housing. And I'm always looking forward to that. I think that is an area that is every effort in our towns usually uses resources from a variety of sources, resources and expertise, both private and public. And traditionally, bonding from Connecticut has been an important part of that, and there are proposed serious cuts to that. And so I look forward to talking to the advocates tonight about the impact of that and how I can be a good advocate to see what we can do to make sure that these really important initiatives in our towns continue to go forward. So looking forward to that. Maybe I'll see you in Norfolk, and have a great rest of your week, and see you next week. Thanks.